You're starting to make me a regular.
Yeah, well, why not? And what we're going to do here is I'd like to look through some biblical passages that are used to support the pro-choice position, or to somehow indicate that abortion is justified.
Well, now let me just say really quick, for people that are watching this, I have not prepared for this at all. I don't know what texts Braxton is going to mention, so I'll be shooting from the hip here.
And I would love it if you didn't know something, because I've yet to find anything you don't know. So
I don't know an awful lot. Trust me.
All right, so we're going to go to this slide right here, and I need to, Jonathan, your forehead's only barely in the screen now. So what we have is a PowerPoint that I have used in the past, and we talk about these issues. And Chris, you'll have to tell me if I'm wrong about some of these things. But biblical evidence used to support abortion. Now, this is from the NIV. Genesis 2:7, the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Now, the argument that is made from pro-choice individuals on this is to say, look here, what made the man a living being is the first time he inhaled oxygen that God breathed into him. Now, my initial reaction to this when I heard it was, you've got to be kidding me, because the reality is what's going on with Adam is not at all the same as it is with a child in utero. Adam, for example, already had a fully formed body, an adult body, and a child would receive oxygen through blood in the womb very, very early on. So these are my thoughts.
It's more than that, Braxton. It's more than that. If I'm not mistaken, the way that babies get oxygen via blood in utero is by breathing. It's just they're not breathing air; they're breathing amniotic fluid. Right? That's why I don't. Do you remember that movie, The Abyss? I think it was called. And they're able to, of course, right? Who hasn't? Only really stupid people haven't.
Right.
But I'm just kidding.
Get out of the chat, you stupid people.
Yeah, but the way that they managed to breathe for long periods of time at depth was by breathing fluid that was based on the amniotic fluid that babies breathe in utero. So you could push, so they are breathing and they're breathing oxygen. It's just they're getting, what they're breathing is fluid containing oxygen rather than a gas containing oxygen.
Yeah, there's that great scene. There's that great scene in The Abyss where the first time someone does this, like breathes in the amniotic synthetic fluid or whatever, and it is horrifying to him at first.
Yeah.
So what you said, right, Chris, is great, because from the very first moment that the unborn child is able to intake something through the mouth, it's taking in oxygen in the amniotic fluid. But even more so, there's oxygen in blood.
I agree with you, but I'll take it a step further, and I'll say that from a logical perspective, this text in no way can be pressed into saying that what makes the necessary condition, the necessary and sufficient condition for being a human being is breathing. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there was a lot more to Adam that made him not living than just the fact that he wasn't breathing, right? His heart wasn't pumping. His blood wasn't circulating. Right? There's his brain, his neurons weren't firing yet. So what the text is doing is it's saying God breathes into Adam and Adam begins breathing, but a lot of other things happen at the same time too. And the text does not say that what made Adam a living being is and only is the fact that now he's breathing. It's saying, well, now he's breathing, and so now he's a living being. But it could have been any number of other things as well that could have equally been highlighted by the biblical author here. So likewise, sure, at the moment of conception, a baby is not yet breathing, doesn't even have blood with oxygen in it. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't have some of the other things that Adam didn't have until he had breath, including self-replicating DNA. Right. So there's a lot of different ways that you can come at this text that, in my mind, make it utterly fail as support for abortion.
It says
even
God did something
at the earliest moments.
Yeah, God did something, and Adam became a living being, which would not have occurred if God had not done that something. That's it.
That's right.
That's all you can get from that.
That's
okay,
right.
next verse. And if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judge decides. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. That's from the New American Standard, Exodus 21:22 through 24. Now, the way this is argued by pro-choice advocates is to say, well, look, if the child dies, then the guy has to pay whatever the judge says or whatever the man says, whatever the man comes up with if the judge decides that's appropriate or something like that. But if someone dies, some adult human dies, well, then it's life for life, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. In other words, we have that one-to-one correspondence of justice that our intuition tells us is I can't think of a better representation of justice. And that would be in play with an adult human versus the adult attacker. But it doesn't seem to be in play for the miscarried child. Now, I actually have some things to say about this myself, and so I'll do that. And then, Chris, you can give me a grade. How do you think about that? What do you think about that?
I'll give you a grade if you want, but since you're my boss, I'm going to be very tempted to give you an inflated grade.
Don't give me something's right. So with Exodus 21. Where it says miscarriage, my contention is that is not the word that should be used there. Now, I'm not Chris Tate. I'm not a languages expert, but the KJV says it this way, so that her fruit depart from her. And that would be consistent with a live birth, just a premature live birth. The NKJV says, if men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished. And then the rest of that verse on top of that sounds like it does apply even to the child if it's that she just gave birth prematurely. The NIV says, and she gives birth prematurely. And the word for miscarriage, I'm going to mispronounce as yatsah, and literally means to come out, the word that's translated miscarriage here. Hence the reading of the KJV and the ESV translations. Contextually, the meaning is usually in relation to a live birth, as in Genesis 25:25, which says, the first came out red, all of him like a hairy robe, and they called his name Esau. Now, if Moses wanted to convey the idea of a miscarriage, there seems to be a better word at his disposal. Moses uses another word for miscarriage just 2 chapters later. None shall lose her young by miscarriage or be barren in your land, Exodus 23:26. The word used here is shakol and is often translated as miscarriage in modern translations. Chris Tate, what say you?
Yeah, I would give it an A-. I think the only thing that I would add is that, you got everything right. The one thing that maybe you could emphasize a little bit more is that after the text says, so that her children come out, that's the best and most neutral way of putting it. The text then goes on to say, velo yihye ason. And what that literally means is...
Of course it does.
There is no harm. There is no accident. There is no calamity, something like that. Now, notice that's not. There is no pronominal suffixes or anything in that clause that say, and there is no harm to the mother. It just says there is no harm. Period. Now, and what's interesting, by the way, this is probably very unimportant, but the word for child there is actually in the plural. So it's actually children. And what that means is, now that seems unlikely. Yes, occasionally women are pregnant with multiple children at the same time, but it's a minority of the time. But what's interesting is this text says all the children who come out, if there are multiple children that come out, and the mother, all of those entities would be covered under the concept of there being no harm. So I actually think it's exactly as you said, Braxton. This text doesn't just not provide support for abortion. It's actually the opposite, because it says that if a child comes out and there is harm, then it's got to be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. And that's pretty harsh. That indicates that a child who comes out and is dead because of what this man did to his life, the baby's life, needs to be repaid according to this lex talionis principle as well. So I think you got it.
And of course, it's even simpler than that, because what this is discussing is the punitive application of the situation. It's not discussing the ontology or status of the unborn anyway. It's not. It's not saying we don't regard this as important. It's just discussing outcomes. So I don't even know why you would even go to a case law because to advocate for abortion, you're having to say this child is not considered of worth to be added to the punishment of what's being dealt out by the judge or the husband. That's not.
Yeah.
That's not even the intent of the passage.
And really quick,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, before we move on, let me add one more thing. I just did a quick search to see where else this word translated harm in the ESV. I don't know what it's translated as in the NISV. It's serious injury. This is remarkable. I never knew this until just now. That word, what is it? It's ason. That is very rarely used in the Old Testament. There's only 5 places, and 2 of them are right here. Now, here's what's fascinating. All 3 of the other places where this word is used, it's talking about the potential that one's child would die. So, for example, Genesis 42:4, Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Or Genesis 42:38, if harm should happen to him on the journey that you were to make, you would bring me down with gray hairs into Sheol. And then 44:29, if you take this child also from me and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs and evil to Sheol. Now, what that means then is it's unthinkable that the word harm in Exodus 21, 23, and 22, it's unthinkable that word doesn't refer to the child that the text just said came out of his mother's womb. Because all the other places where it's used, it refers to harm befalling the child. So
that's
again,
great, man. That's a great insight.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
you do pretty well off the cuff with no problem.
Yeah,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's kind of like I had this text that I used to preach from when I would go to a church, and it was on the fire of God. And so I would look at places where the fire of God shows up. Anyway, one day sitting on a church pew, I was looking at my concordance, and I noticed that in Exodus 3, when Moses, when you have the burning bush encounter, after God speaks to Moses through the burning bush, he says, "Here am I." And ultimately, send me to, he doesn't want to ultimately because of his speech and all that, but he's ready. He's there. He's here I am. If you go to Isaiah chapter 6, verses 5 and following, you have a guy who is having a real pity party, or at least would have been justified in having a pity party. And when he encounters the fire of God in a burning ember from off the altar of God, so this is the fire of God, the first thing he says is, "Here I am." And what's cool about it is these are different human authors separated by geography and time, and yet when they encountered the same fire of God's fire, the fire of God, they had exactly the same response. And I think that little things like that are kind of like undesigned coincidences. They kind of help out. Let's move on to the one that is most often used, that I see the most often from New Atheist people. And that's Numbers 5, 11 through 22. So I'm actually going to just read that. I don't have it up here, but I'm just going to read it to you from the New American Standard Version, which may be the problematic translation, but let's just see. And it's a little bit of it's like a couple of paragraphs. So just give me a second to read this. And by the way, ask yourself, without speculating as you're reading, without trying to read between the lines, and you could do that without even noticing you're doing it. Does this say anything about abortion at all in this text? And this is the principal text used. Here's what it says. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, if any man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, and a man has intercourse with her, and it is hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she is undetected, although she has defiled herself, and there is no witness against her, and she has not been caught in the act. If a spirit of jealousy comes over him and he is jealous of his wife when she has defiled herself, or if a spirit of jealousy comes over him and he is jealous of his wife when she has not defiled herself, the man shall bring his wife to the priest, and she shall bring as an offering for her 1/10 of an ephah of barley meal. He shall not pour oil on it, nor put frankincense in it, for it is a grain offering of jealousy, a grain offering of memorial, a reminder of iniquity. Then the priest shall bring her near and have her stand before the Lord. And the priest shall take holy water in an earthen vessel, and he shall take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into water. priest shall then have the woman. Did I get this in the New American Standard? Yep, it is. The priest shall then have the woman stand before the Lord and let the hair of the woman's head go loose and place the grain offering of memorial in her hands, which is the grain offering of jealousy. And in the hand of the priest is to be the water of bitterness that brings a curse. The priest shall have her take an oath, and all shall say, shall say to the woman, if no man has lain with you, and if you have not gone astray into uncleanness, being under the authority of your husband, be immune to the water of bitterness that brings a curse. If you, however, have gone astray, being under the authority of your husband, and if you have defiled yourself, and a man other than your husband has had intercourse with you, then the priest shall have the woman swear with the oath of the curse, and the priest shall say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people by the Lord's making your thigh waste away and your abdomen swell. And this water that brings a curse shall go into your stomach and make your abdomen swell and your thigh waste away. And the woman shall say, amen and amen. The priest shall then write these curses on a scroll, and he shall wash them off in the water of bitterness. We're almost done. Then he shall make the woman drink the water of bitterness that brings a curse, so that the water which brings a curse will go into her and cause bitterness. The priest shall take the grain offering of jealousy from the woman's hand, and he shall wave the grain offering before the Lord and bring it to the altar. And the priest shall take a handful of the grain offering as its memorial offering and offer it up in the smoke of the altar. And afterward he shall make the woman drink the water. When he has made her drink the water, when it shall come about, if she has defiled herself, how? By adultery, and has been unfaithful to her husband, adultery, that the water which brings a curse will go into her and cause bitterness, and her abdomen will swell, and her thigh will waste away, and the woman will become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is clean, she will then be free and conceive children. Now, we're almost done here. This is the law of jealousy when a wife under the authority of her husband goes astray and defiles herself, or when a spirit of jealousy comes over a man and he is jealous of his wife. He shall then make the woman stand before the Lord, and the priest shall apply to all this law to her. Moreover, the man will be free from guilt. The woman shall bear her guilt. Okay, now what I want to say about this initially is this is another place where, depending on the translation that you have, the final phrases of that will include the word miscarriage. But most of the translations have it that, I had all this pulled up, but now it's gone, explain that, no, what's happening is her abdomen will swell and the thigh waste away. One of them says thigh will fall off or something like that. But notice that what it seems to me is most obvious here is, first of all, unless you have that translation that indicates a miscarriage, which is not what most of the translations have, and Chris can speak to that in a moment. But unless you have that one, there is nothing in this passage that speaks of an abortion. What happens is people read through the laws and think, oh, the guy is afraid that she had an affair and got pregnant. Well, I think the most common reading of this that takes what's said here into account is, yeah, there is a punishment if she had an affair. That what it's saying is going to happen here is she might be sterile from that day forward. And that would make her somewhat accursed in the eyes of Israel, because unfortunately, if you read the Bible and you read what's going on with women who can't have children, this is a horrible thing. Have you ever wondered why it is the Bible doesn't speak to directly to contraception, and you have to go to weird things like the story of Judah and Genesis and all this kind of thing? Is because people weren't generally trying not to have children in the Bible. They were trying to have children. If you reference to them the notion of not wanting to have children, that would be odd. Why wouldn't you want to have more hands to help around the house? Why wouldn't you want to have, blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. So that does seem, I could see that as an explanation of this, but I don't see that this is abortion. Lastly, before I turn it over to you guys, is when I look at this text, what I see is if there's any fear that of actual harm done to the woman through this ceremony, this involves some dust taken off the floor of the tabernacle. But understand that dust off the floor of the tabernacle, a pinch of it into this is not going to be dangerous to the woman. If it is, it's dangerous to the whole camp because everyone's camping on the same ground. So it's not like there's anything scientifically going on here that would cause an abortion. And there's not any real danger to the woman here. And if you're an atheist, you can just look at this and say, well, it was a superstitious ceremony. And guess what? The woman, if you think that there's nothing supernatural going on, then the woman's going to be fine either way. So those are my thoughts on this passage. But what do you guys say? Or should I have talked for a few more moments as you're doing some research?
No, not at all. I'm just doing some quick skimming of commentaries, and from what I can tell, there is no basis for concluding that what's going on here is a miscarriage in the event. Excuse me. In the event that this woman has in fact been unfaithful and drinks that potion or whatever, it's just sort of an assumption that if she had gotten pregnant, then her belly might swell and there would be, some sort of adverse effect that would result in her being her miscarrying. But the text doesn't say that, and
God would be in control of that.
And God would be in control of that. And let's say, hypothetically speaking, that's what it is. Well, then the miscarriage of her baby would actually be a punishment for her sin. It's not. It's not saying, "Hey, abortion is totally fine." No, it's this miscarriage is the result of a sin, if in fact that's what it is. But again, it's not. There's nothing here to ground the idea that what's going on is a miscarriage. What the commentators seem to generally agree on is that the language of the thigh, the thigh falling away, is a reference to becoming barren, so no longer being able to have children.
That's what I suspected.
And where the debate tends to lie is what it means for the belly to swell. But that's all the text says, is that the belly will swell, and any claim that what's going on there is a resulting miscarriage is just a speculative interpretation of the belly swelling. Commentators I'm looking at seem to suggest that the likelier explanation is that this is something of a mock pregnancy. It's one of the commentators. It's that I'm looking at, Tim Ashley, I think it is, uses the word pseudocyesis, which is sort of a belly that swells and is mistaken for being a pregnant belly. Well, if you've got a woman who has been adulterous and who is being cursed with what's the word I'm looking for not, barrenness, cursed with barrenness, it would only exacerbate the punishment, the shame and the and the guilt of that punishment, to have that falling barren coupled with this humiliating mock pregnancy of a swelled belly that is not really a pregnant belly, but is rather just a mockery of it. That would just further make the punishment all the more severe. But here's the thing: that is no less plausible and no more speculative than the miscarriage reading. So if this is, I thought I saw somebody, maybe it was you, Braxton, when you introduced this text, said this is the one that they always go to. And I'm thinking, this is the best they've got? Something that is totally speculative as support for abortion? It's crazy.
This is one that comes up all the time. And interestingly, so the NIV is the one that uses the term miscarriage. The NKJV says, when the Lord makes your thigh rot and your belly swell, and makes your belly swell and your thigh rot. The KJV says, when the Lord doth make thy thigh rot, thy belly to swell, to make thy belly swell and the thigh rot. Same thing. ESV, when the Lord makes your thigh fall away and your body swell, and make your womb swell and your thigh fall away. And the ASV, doth make thy thigh fall away and thy body to swell, and make thy body to swell and thy thigh fall away. So anyway, you'll notice that we have multiple translations here. And even if you don't want to take our word for it or Chris State's word for it, these translations have teams of people that work on them. And this is what they came up with. And so you have kind of a spread there with these different translations for this. You've heard what we both have to say about it. Jonathan, you want to say anything about this?
I've been distracted, so I'm sorry.
Well, we're talking about the ceremony in Numbers 5 where the woman's thigh.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get the gist.
Okay. Well, just so you know, it's not support for abortion. Okay.
I knew that much.
Anything else you want to say about this, Chris?
Yeah. So this is literally, and granted, I've only scanned about 4 or 5 commentaries. By the way, one of which is by no means a conservative commentary. The JPS, the Jewish Publication Society's Torah commentary. They are not going to be conservative Jews, for let alone conservative evangelicals, and even that commentary makes no mention of miscarriage whatsoever. It says that the Hebrew tzava, meaning distend or swell, is a unique usage of unknown etymology, and if it's related to the Akkadian sabu, flood, then the effect of the curse would be to flood the woman's uterus, thereby making certain that she would be unable to conceive. Again, there's just no basis here for concluding miscarriage. But the whole reason what I wanted to say was this: what I'm about to read you is literally the only affirmative statement for reading this as miscarriage that I've happened upon as I've scanned these commentaries, and I want you to see how vapid the statement is. A miscarriage is apparently expected should the woman be guilty, and then in parentheses 5:22, which is the verse that mentions the belly swelling. That's it. There's no exegesis. There's nothing there to substantiate that claim. It's as if this commentator this is the Eerdmans commentary on the Bible, which includes contributors like Jimmy Dunn, which just tells you just how liberal this commentary is. But it says this particular commentator is Philip Budd, and literally all he says is a miscarriage is apparently expected should the woman be guilty. So he thinks that just by reading that text, her woman,
it's obvious, guys.
That's obvious, guys. No, it's such baloney.
All right, so let's go on to one more slide. And real quickly, I don't think we'll have as much to say, although we might. I could be wrong. What about biblical evidence against abortion? This is from the NIV, from Luke 1:39 through 44. And notice how it treats fetuses as persons. At that time, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leapt in her womb. And Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. In a loud voice, she exclaimed, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear!" Exclamation point. "But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me? As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leapt for joy." So the idea here is just that we're noticing that the baby is being treated as a person, even in the womb. I don't have anything else to add to that, Chris or Jonathan. Do you? That's the one that you read it and you write a commentary and you say, Elizabeth thought that the baby in her womb was a baby.
Yeah. Luke,
right.
The physician, thought that the unborn.
Yeah, Luke thought it was a baby.
Yeah. Well, I thought they were both babies. Yeah.
One thing I really love about this is the phrase "leapt for joy" or "leaped for joy" at the end of verse 44. It's a preposition, it's a verb and a prepositional phrase. The verb is to leap, but what I think is really powerful is the prepositional phrase part of that, which is en angaliase, which is exultation, right? I mean, it's not just that this baby twitched. The baby is being attributed the emotion of exaltation and joy by the text, and I think that takes it even makes it more clear just how obvious this is a living person. So,
a person expressing something.
Yeah. With intentionality.
Yeah.
All right. Next verse, Jeremiah 1:4 through 5. This is one of the ones that you hear all the time, if not the most obvious. "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations." Now, you can make a hard or a soft claim on this. The hard claim is, look, it says that God forms children in the womb, and that's the principal issue here. Well, there's another consideration that you could use in a softer claim, even if you don't think that the formed language and all of that is as clinching. What you can say about it, God intended this person for certain activities in life, certain ministry in life. And God was doing something, and you got in the way of that if you committed an abortion. I don't know what you as a Calvinist would say to that, Chris, because if a person was going to be aborted, perhaps God didn't plan out their lives with all these things. Or perhaps you do hold that as maybe you're like those Molinist Calvinists who think God knows all the other ways he could have done it. Basically.
No. I think you got it. I think I would say if I were trying to if I were trying to steelman the abortionists or abortion supporters debate here, I think I would say that, in a Calvinist sense, and even I don't even know if Calvinism is necessary for this. Just because God has purposes for Jeremiah that motivates him to form him in the womb and consecrate him and appoint him and everything, doesn't necessarily mean that he does that with every single person that lives.
But what you could say, Chris, is you could say God has general purposes for every human that exists, and so when you end the life of a human, you cut off the expression that could have been there of whatever they would have done.
Fulfillment of the original mandate in Genesis 1, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Well,
like they're general is what I'm saying. General.
Well, I think that's a good point. But how does that apply to this text? How does that make this text an argument against abortion?
If someone said to you, well, okay, he had that plan for Jeremiah, but that doesn't mean he has plans like that for everyone. You could say, well, we do believe God has general plans for everyone. Of course, that would be maybe where the Calvinist thing would come up.
Well, but again, I guess what I'm saying is even granting that God has a general purpose for every person that's created, it seems to me that once you say that, you've got a standalone argument that is really distinct from this text. In other words, this text doesn't seem to me to be to add anything to the argument if you first bring in the idea that God has general purposes for every single person that he creates.
So that is there is an interesting idea here that someone could push back and say, just because he did that for Jeremiah doesn't mean he did that for everyone. But they would also have to say, certainly he must, or maybe not certainly, but we would expect that if he did it for Jeremiah, he did it for others. You could at least say that. But the truth is, most people, number one, are not, most Christians even are not Calvinists. And they're going to assume that God has plans, intentions for people's lives aside from Jeremiah. So you may have a subset of progressive Christians who are also Calvinists or something. You have a problem with this. That'd be a really weird person. A collection of beliefs. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you can just go, to the Psalms and other passages just about fearfully and wonderfully made, about God's general providential hand in the creation of human beings, because even if David is talking about himself, he's drawing on a larger tradition of how they believed, going back to Genesis, about God's intimate involvement in human life. So, it's not wrong, even if you don't want to have the further appointment to some specific ministry. There's still the general sense, I think, in the biblical worldview, that God is intimately involved in the creation of life itself. And so when you say that, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made and all of that.
But on top of that, even if we granted the criticism, we could say, if one wanted to build a cumulative case from the Bible against abortion, you would want to include this passage because it is one of those passages that does at least provide some evidence that God plans for people's lives, even if it's not certain evidence that he does that for everyone.
Like specific.
It's like I've got some evidence from opposition. You've got none.
Yeah.
There is no passage that said God had no plans for this guy's life. Well, Chris, then when you look at this passage, is there anything in it would you say about this? I don't think that speaks to the abortion issue one way or the other, or informs it one way or the other.
I think it supplements it. There are two kinds of debaters, at least. One is the shotgun debater who goes a mile wide and an inch deep and just throws a scattergun of texts and trying to overwhelm his opponent or her opponent. The other kind is more like a sniper. And that's the way I tend to approach arguments. Is I try to, instead of going a mile wide and an inch deep, I try to go a mile deep and an inch wide, and focus on the arguments that are the most difficult to rebut. And for me, the example from John the Baptist leaping for joy in his mother's womb, that strikes me as far more powerful support than this one. And so this is the kind of text that I'd probably use only as a supplement to the case. But it did make me think of Psalm 51, 5, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. It'd be interesting to dig into the Hebrew there and see if what it means for to say that my mother conceived me, because if conception there refers to something happening pre-birth, then David, the psalmist here, is saying he was himself inside of his mother's womb, and that would, arguably be a stronger support than the one that we were looking at in Jeremiah.
All right, so you'll probably feel the same way then about also wisdom literature here, Job 10:2 and 8 through 9. I will say to God, your hand shaped me and made me. Will you now turn and destroy me? Remember that you molded me like clay. Will you now turn me to dust again? So do you have the similar reaction to that you have to the Jeremiah passage? I mean, first of all, it's Job saying this, but it is in inspired scripture. But would you say that? Would you say, well, this is what Job thinks, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's what God knows?
Well, hold on a second. I didn't say that the Jeremiah text is.
No, that's not the criticism. That's not the criticism you gave of the Jeremiah text. But what I'm saying is, would you approach this? I was throwing out several options. If someone wanted to be critical of this, they could say, well, yeah, Job thought that, but how do I know that God thought that?
Well, hold on. I'm sorry. Let me go back to Jeremiah for a second, because the cutting off of God's purposes argument is the one I said I would treat as supplementary. Mm-hmm. But notice what the text says, at least as translated in the ESV, Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed you in the womb.
Yeah, I knew you.
So the text, I'm trying to see what the underlying Hebrew is, and
figure that out for us. It's good to have you handy for that sort of thing.
Well, it just goes back to what I was saying. The biblical worldview is God's intimate and providential having a hand in the creation of life in general. So, I mean, is drawing upon those traditions. Same with Job. It's drawing, I mean, yeah, granted, I mean, it's molded me like clay instead of dirt, and it's not necessarily an Adamic echo, but it's still just the idea of God's intimate hand in creation.
Well, and I think, and that's certainly relevant and important, but I think the thing that strikes me as stronger is that Jeremiah is here being called you at a time where he is still in his mother's womb. Right? The Hebrew word
prior to being formed in the womb.
That's the thing
but the author's just saying that prior to him forming in the womb, he's got a purpose for him.
Right.
What I'm saying, he knew him, right? But of course, you can't press that into the same kind of argument I'm doing, because that would mean that he existed in eternity past. Right? Yeah, exactly. That's probably not wise. But my point here is that the text doesn't say before I formed the zygote that would become you. Right? That's not what he says. Before I formed you, and the text does say that I made you in the belly, in the womb. So that I take to be pretty powerful. It's saying that we are who we are before we have exited our mother's wombs. So I take that I do think is a good argument, and I think that that's the same kind of thing going on in Job. Right? Your hands fashioned and made me. If we couple that with what we just read from Jeremiah, that fashioning and making happens inside of the woman's belly, and the person who is fashioned and made is Job, not some sort of yet to be Job zygote. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think that together these make a pretty powerful case, just maybe not for the same reasons that you might have thought.
Yeah, the nice thing about the Jeremiah passage that I don't see in the Job passage is the reference to that happening in the womb.
Right.
That's the really nice one. Whoops, where's Chris? There he is. Yeah, so those are the passages that I had for us to discuss as a little after show. We probably shouldn't do this for very much longer because we all have other stuff we need to do, but this has been fun. Chris, anything else you want to say about this or anything else?
No, just thanks for having me on. I really enjoy getting to hang out with you guys after your show, and hopefully your viewers don't get too sick of me.
No way. All right, guys. Love everyone. Glad everyone's here. We'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.